Dr. David Morledge. We are so excited to have you on our series, The Power of Music, and I'm so grateful to have you here today joining us. So welcome.
I'm honored.
Well, we've known each other for so long, decades
Absolutely.
now.
Yes, yes.
I have known and worked with you as medical director at Texas Neuro-Rehab Hospital here in Austin, Texas, also as head medical director at St. David's Rehabilitation Hospital. You have been one of our leading neurologists in not only Austin, all but throughout Texas, and people even come from all over the United States to be under your care as one of the best neurologists that I have ever worked with, and I'm not the only one who knows that about you. So again, neuroscience is your thing, and I just want to share with people a little bit of how we met. We have a common denominator in our story as colleagues coming together. The mythical, the wonderful founder of Austin Neurological Clinic, where you've also been with for
34 years.
Thank you. I was going to say it was decades, 34 years, but the founder of that was John Douglas Hudson. He was one of the first neurologists, if not the first neurologist here in Austin, Texas. Am I right about that?
Absolutely. What a visionary.
Yes.
Yes.
A visionary and a passionate, patient-centered neuroscientist, neurologist, like research. I don't know if you got these emails at 2 a.m., 3 a.m. like I did, but Dr. Hudson, anything that had to do with music in the brain, neuroplasticity, even before I think we had the term, really.
Yes, that's correct.
Describe him to you, because about
So Doug
Hudson.
I mean, I think he looks a lot like Walter Matthau, don't you?
Yes,
I mean,
do. And John
young-
Wayne. And John Wayne.
Yeah.
He's so big in those
Yeah.
boots. He's such
well,
commanding.
and a lot of people don't know this, but he played collegiate football at Texas Tech.
I didn't.
Yeah.
I never knew that.
Yeah. So anyway, but when he first came to Austin, way back when, we didn't have a CAT scan, okay?
Yes.
To look at a brain, you had to have a pneumoencephalogram. Can you imagine?
I
You
don't
wanna
even
hear
know
what
what that
that
is. I don't even know what that is.
You had to undergo a spinal tap. They injected
gosh.
air in your brain, put you in this chair, turned you upside down, and if you saw the brain shift to one side, the patient probably had a tumor or something like that. So how frustrating to practice neurology without imaging. So Doug was instrumental in bringing the first CAT scanner to Austin.
He's done that over and over.
And he met with this first investment group of docs, and he presented it because he had been to a radiology meeting, and the first group of doctors said, that'll never fly, and elected not to invest. And so the second group talked him into it, and then first CAT scan was here, and then I know this sounds silly and funny, but he was instrumental in bringing the first fax machine to all the hospitals.
And we still are using fax machines in the digital age still.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. But then he really got into clinical research, and he was a big proponent in trying, if it made sense scientifically and was safe, out at Texas Neuro-Rehab, those poor, unfortunate folks that were in kind of a, not persistent vegetative state, but minimally responsive. We came up with different coma cocktails, we would call them. But yeah, Dr. Hudson, he was really on the cutting edge.
He introduced me to you. I know he worked so hard to recruit you. Where were you when he found you?
I did my residency at University of Arizona in Tucson.
Okay.
Yeah. And I remember I flew out and interviewed with the group, and at that time we were 8 or 9 neurologists, huge group.
You had all the top people there because I was a young music therapist, and talking about that scientific research and him being the early adapter, always on it, he found me through research. He literally followed the trail, and he pitched it to me this way. He says, all I can find is music therapists will do sing-along. He goes, I want neuro, I want you to do gait, I want to do advanced studies on cognition, I want to do studies with speech and swallow, very functional. And And so I showed up with a book this big of research in all those areas, and he did everything. He literally strung on the administration. There was no saying no to him pulling in a full music therapy program and me head of it down there.
Yeah.
That's where he said, I want you to meet this young doctor, and I'm trying to get him in. I'm wanting to get him in. And he pitched you like he really wanted you there. And so that's how I was introduced to you before I even knew you, was Dr. Hudson really wanted you as part of this team. And even when I was there, we did all ages and stages at the Center for Music Therapy at my facility, and then services at St. David's Rehab. We did services at Texas Neuro-Rehab. We did Warm Springs. I mean, we were doing music therapy all over the state. And what was interesting is Dr. Godsey, right, was at Austin Neurological Clinic, pediatric. Dr. Karnick, one of those just passionate, best pediatric neurologists ever that I've ever worked with. I love Dr. Karnick. He was there. Hudson, you. I mean, it was like a dream team that he curated of the best of not just science, but heart, right?
Right.
The art. It was a science to Dr. Hudson, and it was an art, what he called the cocktail of patient caring for a patient. And he always fought for his patients, never let me off the hook. He called me one time at 5 a.m. and he's like, I need you in here now. I have this patient with Parkinson's. And we were using the full music therapy for gait and walking. I'm taking them off their meds to find out how much, what does he call it, fuel they have in the fuel tank, to find out how much dopamine.
Dopamine reserve.
Yeah, and he was going to take them off, and he didn't want them to be completely frozen, so he wanted the music at 5 a.m. 5 a.m. 5 a.m. I'm like, yes, Dr. Hudson, I'll be right there. So, we got brought into a real great, passionate culture of seeing a patient for who they were. And I'm curious, what led you to pick your home here? What led you into your story of choosing the healing art of medicine, and especially neuro? What led you here? Can I just?
Yeah, so I truly feel medicine is a calling. I don't consider it an occupation. And so I knew, starting in high school, believe it or not, I wanted to be a physician. And so during medical school, this is very common, you end up looking up to a mentor, a role model.
Yeah.
And mine happened to be a neurologist by the name of Tom Hutton, who now owns a very large ranch in Fredericksburg. But he was a movement disorder specialist, Parkinson's. And he and I ended up writing a couple of papers. One was about visual disturbance with Parkinson's, and it's based on lack of dopamine. And I know you've heard this before, but the Parkinson's patient, they'll say, I just can't see the image. I'm missing the forest for the trees. And then they'll go to a neuro-ophthalmologist. Your acuity is fine, 20/20, this is not the problem. It's a visual perception based on the fact that you don't have enough dopamine. And so we wrote some papers. I liked his lifestyle. I liked how he approached things. And so that really what got me into neurology.
And this is in high school, David?
No, this was during medical school.
In medical school, I was going to Arizona when you were in Arizona.
Yeah.
That's fascinating work. And this was what decade? 80s? Late 80s? Because I met you in the early 90s.
Yeah, this was 1986.
Wow. Now, if that was 1986 and we had that much insight into the brain, and especially for the visual, because I agree, I know as a music therapist, auditory overrides visual, and that's why we have so much success with our Parkinson's patients, that when they're having all those visual problems, we can override a lot of the visual freezing because of light to dark, or there's stripes on the floor that make them freeze. With the auditory cueing, they can just move right over it, and it rules. It's king of the brain on that. But it wasn't until the 90s, right, that we really called the 90s the decade of the brain. Correct?
Correct.
And to Dr. Hudson, because he started here in the 60s or 70s, right?
Early 70s.
Early 70s. And as he described it to me back when he started, it was all just clinical diagnosis, meaning he had to diagnose a Parkinson's patient or Alzheimer's or all these pretty much with what he could, you guys would ask
Or
questions.
based on our exam, really.
That's
Because
it.
we didn't have an imaging.
That's it.
Yeah, the joke with neurology back then was we can tell you where the lesion is, but we can't help you. And it's true.
It
back then.
was. It was what you guys have called, sometimes people think you're doing like compared to some of the other areas of medicine like cardiac and stuff who have so many sensors and technology to do all this early precise data. Neurologists, because it was the brain and the hardest to see, the hardest, it was still a mystery. Like
Well,
the
the
deep
brain
ocean
still is a
it's still a big mystery. But the 90s, that's when Dr. Hudson, with all his passion and commitment and great science and all driven towards patient care, got an MRI machine in this town, right? So, but that wasn't until the 90s that was invented, correct? Or the late 80s, early 90s. So we didn't have MRI. Can you explain MRI does what? How does it work?
Well,
just a brief.
a CAT scan is just a gross assessment of the brain. The MRI now, with all the fancy software, we can literally see various circuits and patterns. There's functional MRI. You'll have the patient do a task.
So you actually watch the brain in action.
Yep. You can see different parts of the brain light up. And so it's just a more physiologic way of looking at the brain.
We can get with music the brain activating all areas at once, and that's a neurologic phenomena. But the precision comes in really watching when, like you said, you're moving a finger and you had a stroke and this hand moves, this one doesn't move very much, and you guys need to look in there and not only look at it and diagnose, but then how are you going to treat it, right? And that's what you were saying. That's when you said patient care is an art and healing, and that's what drew you into medicine and clinical practice versus research?
Correct. Yeah, I'm a people person. I like to visit, chat.
I have always been impressed by, you'd be on rounds at the hospital, and I might be in there doing music therapy, and it was time for you to check in with your patient. You walk in the door, you always say, hi, you recognize me, but you always acknowledge your patient by something personal about them. You always know something. You ask them about UT in the football game. You ask them about their grandchild or their wife, you never, ever walk into a room, open a chart, and just start going into blood pressure, da-da-da-da-da. You always start the conversation so beautifully. Eye contact and something, how are you, and seeing them as a person. What is it in your journey with choosing that you chose neuroscience so early that's compelled you on this whole story and staying in a world that this thing that we didn't even know neuroplasticity? Because when I started, I'm going to summarize it. When I started in the 1980s, we were told as music therapists that there was this gray mass in the skull. Some of us used it more than others, right? Like 10%. But once you lost functioning or you had a disease process or injury to that part of mass, you were never going to get it back. That's where I started. I meet you guys. I meet Hudson especially. Hudson especially, in those 1990s came on. And this is when you're coming on the scene. Neuroplasticity, you do these papers on Parkinson's, dopamine, but you chose neurology, and there's this whole new groundbreaking paradigm shift where it's not gray mass that's just sitting in the skull. And then once you lose it, you're never going to get that function back. Start us with that story on your journey with neuroplasticity.
Just from a treatment standpoint, the only thing we had to treat MS with were steroids. Okay.
Yeah.
And then over time, we had 2 or 3 medications. Now we have 24 different medications to treat MS, which is just amazing. The other thing that you've heard of this term in the emergency room, time is brain.
Yes.
In other words, after a stroke, you have a therapeutic window of roughly 4.5 hours. But when I first started practicing, The strokes literally were pushed to the side in the back of the emergency room, and we'll get to you in a little while. In other
Why?
words, we didn't know about this time as brain and what
That's
happens.
neuroplasticity.
Right. We didn't know about the early inflammatory response that we see during a stroke or a traumatic brain injury, and how that transitions later to a regenerative healing process. And so once the thrombolytic agents came out, the clot buster medicines, that's when people are educated now. Oh, gee, my right side just went numb or paralyzed. I better get to the emergency room.
Tell us what neuroplasticity is for the non-MDs in the room.
Yeah,
What
so
is neuroplasticity?
neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to basically repair itself and make new circuits or pathways following a stroke, traumatic brain injury, lack of oxygen. And the key points, key takeaway points, the younger the brain, the more neuroplastic.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
So if you have a brain injury and you're 16, as a rule, you're going to do better than somebody that's 80, right? The second thing is, and this is very important as far as us talking about music today, musicians, and they've shown this,
Yes.
musicians have a better prognosis in recovering from a traumatic brain injury and or stroke than non-musicians.
And we're not talking just like your superstar musician.
No.
We're talking even doctors like you
We're
who
talking-
play banjo and guitar your whole life, right?
Yeah.
People who play band, people, kids who are singing in choir. So we're talking musicians, not
Yes.
just your superstars.
And they've looked at this. The gray matter in musicians has a higher volume. You'll see the hippocampus in the auditory processing area has a more dense amount of neurons, if you will. And so I came across a couple of studies. One was just playing the piano 30 minutes twice a week improved cognition in folks that had TBIs, traumatic brain injury.
Correct. Even if they had no prior musical experience in music therapy, we get them improvising.
The other thing to remember, the old textbooks basically, well, you're 12 to 18 months post-injury. This is going to be it for you.
Yeah.
And we know now, I'll see people 20 years post-injury,
Yes.
and they'll say, Doc, you're not going to believe what I did today. I was able to, it may be a functional task that they could never do. So you just can't put a date on it, right?
And that's been a huge shift. And I think you and I, and of course, Dr. Hudson being the early adapter and that huge advocate, like I said, literally strong on administration, pulling in music therapy program. 5 of us, the head of the PT said it was a shotgun wedding with physical therapy back then, because she's like, our Parkinson's patient, we can't make them walk. And she's like, this is crazy. And of course, it only took us a few months for her to be completely on board and transform. But we've lived that changing our expectations of what, when your child is born and there was a bleed during birth, right? That used to be such a lifelong trajectory of talent parents being told they're going to be completely bedridden the rest of their life during birth or post-birth.
Thank goodness for neuroplasticity.
Exactly, and we know that. And so, no, you get them in therapy and you get them, plugged in and you say, learn about the brain. And especially, and you know that because in your group we're some of the best, to get them with a good neuropediatrician, right?
Correct.
That is going to just really talk to them and the hope that you're going to feed into their soul, right? You and I were just talking, and I was saying one of the things you influenced me, it was 15, maybe even 20 years ago. But we were dealing with a difficult case. We've had a lot of difficult patients in the years, and you've been such a wonderful leader of our teams, always, all of our treatment teams. But when you come out of those hard conversations where it does look like all the information is saying they're going to die. All the information is say if they do survive, it's going to be rough. But this is, we hadn't really fully made that switch to fully understanding what neuroplasticity really meant when it came down to talking to patients and the possibilities, what they was going to be capable of for the rest of their life. I think he used to put it, we used to have a book. You always have to give them all the information that you can, as truthfully and honestly, because they'll never trust you as their doctor if you don't. They'll never trust any of us on the care team if you don't tell them that they could die or tell them that what life could be. But you also have to feed hope, and you have to get them to get up. You have to have them try to stand. You have to encourage this, like, get in there and work hard, right? So I had told you the thing that I remember you telling me. It's this balance of how to work and talk with the patient and tell them the facts and the reality, but without nailing that last nail into the coffin of hope. Let me ask you to pull in that personal story on the neuroplasticity. When did you start with music?
So at age 10, my grandparents gave me my first guitar. It was a nylon Yamaha. And I remember taking a few lessons, and then after that, I sort of just learned it, on my own. And then I think my first 5-string banjo I got in the 8th grade.
Really?
Yeah.
You've been playing banjo first?
No, I was playing guitar
8th
first.
grade, okay.
Yeah,
Guitar at 10, 8th grade. Got it. Okay.
And so my personal journey, I lost both parents very early on in life.
I never knew that.
Yeah. And so music to me has always been a form of comfort and strength and renewal. My dad, when I was in 7th grade, got super depressed. Back then, we didn't have any, decent antidepressants, and he took his life. And of course, that'll do a number on you when you're in 7th grade. And so that was just my sister and myself, and I kind of went down the rebel pathway, and she was the straight A student back then. And thankfully, we were in a church where we had and this was kind of different way back then, a contemporary folk service. So I started playing guitar in church. We had drums, we had a bass, we had 3 guitarists, and so it was the most attended service because everybody got into it, even the older folks.
Yep. And
so that my faith and my music has really gotten me through difficult times. And then when I was a junior at University of Texas, my mom was killed in a car accident.
David, I'm so sorry.
And what was really ironic about all that, she had a bad brain injury. And so I had to make the decision after 10 days on a ventilator to remove her because they told us she was, brain dead. So, but had I not had, and I do this all the time, I just pick up my guitar and, some people will open a book or just have quiet time. I'll just pick my guitar up and play it, and then it's a new day. But anyway, so I've always been in garage bands and, various bands with doctors throughout the years. And, we just had my retirement party.
Yeah.
And Hope.
The Neuroplasticity's played again.
Yeah. I think what were we called? Gray Matter or something. But
we did.
We played about 6 songs and just had a blast.
It was wonderful.
And thankfully, over the years, I've got to know a lot of my patients well, and some of them are really, really good musicians.
Yes, they are.
And so I called them up, and we had a blast. But anyway, music has always been a really important part of my life, and I can't imagine not being able to play or just listen, really. Because, when you listen to music, it brings back memories. It brings together people. Yeah. It's an emotional experience. And, from a physiologic standpoint, when you have goosebumps listening to a song, what's happening there is you're increasing cerebral perfusion into the amygdala.
I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah, the amygdala, the emotional seat of the brain. And that's when things really happen.
So in that summary to you, what is music?
Yeah. It's, I know this sounds really cliche, but it's a universal language that you could be in Greece, Europe, Thailand, wherever. And if you're listening to a song or playing a song, it just tends to bring everyone together and bond us all together, you know.
We ended up moving the Center for Music Therapy into the building that Austin Neurologic Clinic owns, and you were our landlord, which really facilitated one of the most fun things is you doctors, you and Dr. Verona, and several of the other doctors in the whole medical science center would do jams, like once a month, you know, 4 o'clock, everybody shuts down. When we music therapists got invited into that groove, and it was so much fun. Emily Morse, brilliant vocalist, guitarist. She would take the drums though, I love that. And then Eddie, bass,
oh
guitar.
My gosh,
Eddie,
what a talented musician.
I know. Eddie Kodopasic, all of our, you know, Angelia. But you know what I loved is when you guys would advocate over at Texas Neuro-Rehab, it's a big campus, and they have the part of the campus that is with children. Some of those children live there for months, right? They come from all over the world, and years. Very, very complex neurologic kids. And during South by Southwest, you created a South by Southwest for the kids.
Right.
And you had all these musicians come together, and we all went and played, and the kids loved it.
That was fun.
I love the way you guys always, you know, there was being in the intensive care, kind of just post-intensive care part. That's the Blue Bonnet unit. Right? And always making sure we had music therapy, but we always, all of us, made sure that everybody, we knew they were a musical gift, and that community then. Until today, I don't think, David, I understood that component that I've always looked at you and always leaned into you as not just such a great, brilliant doctor, but this incredible human being, that it's scary at times. I'm just gonna own it, at least for myself. It's just humanity when the brain is bleeding and it's broken and that skull is cracked, or the disease, you know, like progressive supranuclear palsy, or some of the things that kids have that their brain gets calcified, like Dr. Karnick's patient that he sent me. You know, it's scary and it's hard. You were one of the people that always stood in there with just such strength and such knowledge. And I think I understand now that you took that on young, you understood, and you never, that's why you always connected with people so well. You understood what they lived through to make that call so young.
Yeah.
With your mom.
Sure.
I also, why me at 11 started healing people through music. My mom had bipolar disorder. The first time I talked her out of suicide, I was barely in kindergarten. You know, it's a journey, right? That helps you understand the science.
Everything builds on each other.
It does, but that core love for people, that caring for humanity, music and ourselves, was no way I could have be who I am. The hope, my mom literally named me after a hymn called Whispering Hope. I was a very sick baby. Dad had a blood conflict. So I was in neonatal intensive care. And she said I'd cry and it was a whisper. I had so many tubes in me. She named me Whispering Hope after Whispering Hope. And she sang me into being my beautiful mother with a color transport who suffered from severe depression. So, you know, it's part of my journey. And it's so funny. We've known each other 36 years on this journey with everybody else's life. And I didn't understand that core love of humanity and feeding hope into our own souls through music, into our faith communities, and bringing all that home. And every patient, we've had the honor of walking by their journey in it.
Yes.
I am so grateful. Here you are, just retired from Austin Neurological Clinic, and I am excited to know you even better.
Good.
So in one of our journeys, can we talk about your journey with one of our shared people?
Sure.
His name is Andy Thomas. He's been, like I said, a really big part of the music community, and the love of his life, Sherma K. Bass. She was like one of the main writers for the Austin American Statesman Arts and Entertainment feature writers. And when I was young and hot in the music therapy scene, and we were like, there was the Mozart Effect, covered some of our research and work, and Wall Street Report. We were just on prime time with Dan Rathers in 48 Hours. The Statesman wanted to do a feature on me and us, and they sent a reporter named Sherma K. Bass. And they did a full front page and back page article. And she spent weeks. She'd come back interviewing me at different times and watching. So I'm going to just set up my part of the story, that here are these two iconic people. That Shirley McKay is known and beloved in Texas, and she's written for Texas Monthly. She's written for National. She's written this, Andy's South by Southwest, all his bands. I get a phone call, and she says, "Is this Hope Young?" And I said, "Yes." And she goes, "You might not remember me. I'm Shirley McKay Bass." I'm like, "I did a story on you, a feature story for the Statesman, you know." And I'm like, "Shirley McKay, of course I remember. How are you?" And blah, blah, blah. And she goes right into it.
Yeah.
She says, "My husband has suffered a really bad accident, and he's lost part of his brain. It's traumatic brain injury." And she said, "I want to tell you that David Morledge's just taken over. Andy's care. He was fading, he was dying. Dr. Morledge has just saved his life, and he's turned him around. I'm asking you to please come. Please come. Take on Andy as a patient." And before she got the car, she started to cry. She goes, "I need to tell you this. I need to tell you I have a vision for my husband. He's a great musician. He's been such part of a vision that he's going to be holding his guitar on stage and playing again one day." So, David, please talk to me about when you met Andy. Talk to us about the prognosis, where he was, what was happening, why Shirley McKay brought you in, because his life was saved by a team of good emergency trauma docs, but the brain was still in a pretty bad shape.
Yeah, so I pulled up his records from 2020. And so initially, you know, he was not following commands. He was essentially unresponsive, totally. Had a tracheostomy, he had a feeding tube.
Now that means that he couldn't breathe on his own.
That's right.
And the feeding tube, he couldn't even take anything by
right.
mouth.
Yeah, no words, no following command. I literally have in my note that the only thing he could do was move his left thumb spontaneously, and that was it. And that actually went on for several weeks before we saw even a glimpse of what we would call processing. And in traumatic brain injury rehab, the whole team gets really excited when, "Oh my gosh, he held up 2 fingers." Or, which was really quite humorous, and I'll say this, we'll sometimes say, "Hey, give us a thumb, you know, hold up a finger." and he goes,
No. The punker,
yeah,
the punk rock.
that was when he was
great.
further along, and when he shot that bird, everyone got so excited because, you know, that tells us he's processing.
Yes.
He's in there.
Yes.
And he was paralyzed. There's no way he could move his fingers.
And even when
first.
he was just...
They were so contracted and deformed.
Yes.
And, you know, I administered Botox injections, several rounds, and thank you for neuroplasticity.
Yes.
This repetition.
Yep.
PT, physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, and
music therapy.
And he passed a swallow test. And, you know, what a lot of people don't realize, it's not like in the movies, you turn a light switch on and, oh, they went from coma to walking or something like that. It's little baby steps.
Yeah.
Little baby steps.
When you shunt the brain, what does that do?
So what had happened with Andy, he had a huge fluid collection over the front of the brain, and it was pushing down. And so it wasn't letting the frontal lobes do their thing. And I think the first neurosurgeon, said, "No, there's no point. What's the point?" And so I made several calls, found a good neurosurgeon, and we put a shunt in, which drained the fluid. And he
turned right around.
He totally turned around.
Yeah. You literally saved his life.
And
you really did.
Well,
you did.
But anyway, you know, and so periodically we have to do follow-up scans to make sure this thing is working in this. And then clinically, you know, how's Andy doing? But he is in the top 1% of my practice. And if you told me I was going to be on stage playing with you and Ray Benson and Andy
And Stanley Jordan.
and Stanley Jordan on UT campus. And when we gave Andy a lead, and he just blew it out of the water.
He did.
I mean, he just freaking blew it
He
out of the water.
did.
So there's no way I would have written that script.
Everybody was saying to let him go. And matter of fact, a lot of friends in the music community had come and seen Andy, and they thought he was going to die.
Well, you
and
know,
he wasn't going to make
his
it.
passion, his life
Yes.
was playing.
Yes.
And sadly, I do have a lot of patients that are paralyzed, let's say, with one hand, and their guitars,
I know.
pianist. But with Andy, dang.
He never gave up.
Nope.
He's his spirit and his
I'm
heart.
telling you, the music therapy totally changed his trajectory as far as the recovery.
And even I'm gonna own that and say thank you. And of course, speech, PT, OT, everything is the fundamentals, but it was the secret sauce with Andy. And, you know, because he was so contracted. And I'm with you. I thought that, you know, as I know that he wanted to play again, and I know Sherma Kay, it was their love story. It was the love story from her holding him, saving his life, knowing to sit him up as he's bleeding out. You know, everything she did to find that strength, to tell me what the vision was, to never let go of Andy. A lot of marriages, when there's TBI, a lot of people will follow the doctors and they take them off life support or they don't shunt the brain, but she got a second opinion, she got you, turned them around. She just never gave up on the vision of them and the love of them.
Yeah, and she's always been his advocate.
She has.
If you look at prognostic factors for recovery and brain injury, whether it be stroke or trauma or whatever, family support and having an advocate.
Yes.
Because what's so sad, some of those folks out there that we take care of out there, no family around.
I know.
And, you know, why are you motivated to get better if somebody doesn't love you and are physically not there on site to support? So.
And I've heard you say to several of our patients that you recognize that they don't have family or their family is unable or unwilling to support. You've always called out caregivers, strangers, support groups in the area that fill in that gap so beautifully. You've given so much support to Capillary Foundation, CAPS. I've always seen you do shout outs to how important the kids in foster care that get advocacy, whether, you know, I've seen you over and over just give so much shout out to people who take people in and fill in that gap because it makes all the difference. And you've said that over and over to people, it makes all the difference. That love, that community being there, family, church, wherever it comes from. If they don't have an advocate in their family, when going out in the world of strangers, see people, find people that provide that vision, that hope, that guidance into what's possible and how to get there. And that's where Andy and Sherma Kay, Andy had Sherma Kay being true to their love, true to the vision of Andy. And when Andy, even when I met him and a lot of stuff, music just, he lit up like a candle on his face. That face that was kind of flat and he couldn't answer a question. As soon as we did a little bit of music, it, like immediately he remembered who he was. Immediately that, I want to do it, I'm going to try. He never gave up. So everything we asked to do, one of the things that I want to speak to, because I ask this question a lot of people, if there's a downside to music.
I would say if music evokes a negative emotion or negative memory for you, I could see where that would not be a good thing.
No, and that's really common with dementia, especially.
And certain types of music. You don't want to bombard the brain with, you know, some loud techno.
Thus, we did not do punk with Andy. We did not do punk right off.
Sorry you punkers out there. But anyway, yeah, so you can have a circuit overload.
Correct.
Visually, if you're in a crowded room, or auditory-wise, if you're listening to music that just is not conducive to healing.
And with Andy, he was a really good study of that we used our voice first. and just simple movements and one sound, because we couldn't do on the stage. It took a lot of getting the brain back and doing the right level of stimulation, because otherwise it caused him to have more dystonic. He would spasm more. So simple rhythm, simple task with just our voice to just allow the brain to have one stimulus and then one muscle response, and just building it from a bottoms up over and over with Andy. But when we did that, it was just like a switch, right? Versus increasing the maladaptive behavior, like a simple rhythm or just holding a drumstick and simply rolling it just to a metronome and staying quiet, or just doing a prompt with our voice. So not to overstimulate a very, like I said, it was very swollen. There was part of it taken out, and he had only one eye. So we just built up that right level of stimulation to get the right muscle activation to get them the cognitive, because as soon as he tried to ask him to two-step command, the muscles would overreact too.
Right.
So, just building him back, but the music, as we got to more complicated singing or music memories, you could see when you'd overstimulate and we'd pull back until we could bring up that whole piece of Andy, and finally just get one finger on a keyboard, or on keys, one finger too. Then trying one hand on a guitar, the therapist would do the left hand and he would just simply do a down strum and try to get this not to curl. So, you just build it back. But anytime if we held him, we went boom, 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 boom. Andy, the chills. What did you call the chilled effect on the brain? You could see it in Andy.
Increased cerebral perfusion.
He had that. He would just beam. His face would go flat to just fully alive. And just learning to build that up, one step, one layer. And as his brain kept healing, the swelling going down, it takes a long time for that swelling to go down, and making that moment on the stage possible. What was it like for you, now that you shared your story about, your family, your mom, your dad, your story, Andy, you both being musicians, what was that like for you that day on the stage?
I was speechless for one, right?
Yeah.
And then I'm just looking around, I'm going, there's Stanley Jordan, there's Ray Benson, there's Andy, who was comatose for 6 months.
And that was 18 months prior? What was it?
Yeah, I'm just...
18 months, 2 years?
It was a hard time wrapping my head around all that, but I thought we sounded pretty good.
We sounded great, but I looked over at you. We both looked at each other. Remember that moment when we kind of came together? I had tears in my eyes. But the sheer joy on your face.
And everybody was standing up, just, There's a lot of people there, personally knew Andy.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was so enjoyable.
Oftentimes patients leave the hospital. And oftentimes they should leave us. That's the joy, right? We want our patients to leave us. That's like, hallelujah. They don't need us anymore and we don't see them. But getting to come back and share a moment of joy and the beginning of what I loved, I could see everybody out that Sherma Kay and Andy had invited so many people from the Austin music community and arts community. And they had only really seen Andy at his worst, thinking he wouldn't recover. And they were on their feet, screaming, yelling, and then Stanley Jordan walks across the stage after he did his first lead because it was so good. And here's the thing I got to acknowledge. I'm a music therapist. I'm a really great, amazing music therapist, but I'm not a Stanley Jordan or Ray Benson. I don't perform. Neither do you. You're pretty great. You're really good. But we're not on the level of Stanley Jordan. So Andy, in rehearsing and playing with me, only was playing leads and up to the level of that chill and that level of me or one of my best therapists. When Stanley said, take the lead, and he nailed that first solo so incredibly and amazingly, we all saw it. Yeah. And you and I knew it far out exceeded anything we hoped for. And then he went across the stage to do it again, and it was Stanley Jordan and Andy going back to back.
Yeah.
So Andy went into a whole nother level of playing. Right? He went out in the stratosphere at Stanley's level. Yeah. And his friends in the music community seeing him back, seeing one of their own back, not only always on stage and he recovered, the musician in him soaring, inviting him back to play at gigs with them. inviting them back. It was like a homecoming, but it was to that testament of the identity of you as a musician, I as a musician, we're all musical, right? The possibilities, the hope that music plays in our lives, and we bring that into our medical practice and the art of healing. But the tip of the iceberg has only been met for so many people around the world. And I know that you have retired from Austin Neurological Clinic because you want to tell this story and you want to bring in a whole new generation of neurologists. Am I right about this? You want to tell everybody about what you're about to do?
Yeah, I'm headed over to the UT Dell Medical School starting in January to teach the residents.
What do you want to do as a good ancestor for the rest of your professional career? What do you want to do?
So my goal is to emphasize to these young physicians how important it is to look at the person as a whole. Yes, the science of medicine is so important, but I think even more important is the art of medicine, and combining the art and science of medicine together, having a conversation with the patient, trying to figure out what's going on with them, not just getting the diagnosis and the treatment. So I just hope I can, share some wisdom with them and make them a more humanistic, if you can say that term, physician.
A good human.
Yeah, a good human. Right.
And good doctor.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anybody I know in this area that can deliver on that as well as I know you can, David.
Well,
you're an incredible doctor, Dr. David Morledge, and one of the best humans I know.
Thank you.
It's been an honor always to work with you and know you.
Okay, here we go. 1, 2, 3. I woke up this morning, my girl was next to me. I said I woke up this morning, my girl was next to me. Well, she's off with some guy she shouldn't be. Her old house looks so lonely, hanging behind those trees. Whoa, this house seems so lonely, hanging behind those trees. Well, blow, wind, blow, blow my baby back to me. Take it, Andy. Oh yeah, he's burning it up.
I love you, Randy Thomas. You are just an inspiration. And you, an amazing Dr. Frank.
That was fun. That was fun.
Thank you so much, guys. What a moment. What a wonderful moment to live and each other's. And I appreciate you all so much for sharing your stories and just who you are. Who you are. Who you are to the world, both of you. And Sherman K. here. And you guys are just really a gift. And this is just such a wonderful moment of joy to share, to see you back, my dear Andy.
Thank you.